We are Unitarian Universalists. When we lift up our principles, some of us think of them as a form of theology, but they are more important to our collective than that. They do not tell us what we should believe. Instead, they tell us how we should be. They tell us how we should act in the larger world and with each other. We are brought to this point today by the fact that Unitarian Universalism has fallen short of the image that was presented to the world and to many of those who embraced this religion. But we are also brought here today by the truth that Unitarian Universalism has shifted course to move towards a place of wholeness, a place that perhaps never existed for us as a denomination. It has been a long and sometimes unforgiving road to this point. But we are here today because we are mindful of the past and because we have hope for the future. We want the practice of this faith to be a fulfilling manifestation of its promise. Open your hearts, seek new ways of understanding. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Andrea Brown. My pronouns are they, them, and I am one of the worship associates here. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to welcome and care for one another better. Whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we take this moment to acknowledge our church occupies unceded Chochenyo and Muwekma Ohlone land. Our church benefits from the seizure and occupation of this land, and our continued participation in settler colonization is an act of violence against the interconnected web of life and relationships we say we hold dear. This statement is a call for action and justice. One place to start is uucb.org/indigenous. We are an angry, justice-seeking, and gentle people, and we will build our relationships together. So take a moment to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. Grab a candle and a way to light it so you can join in the chalice lighting at home. Let us kindle our flames with the words of Rebecca Savage. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This, a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly through our highest ideals. Oh dear. I now invite you to share in the comments where you are by writing, "I carry this flame" in whatever town or city you are joining us from.
And now I invite you to join in singing our opening song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. But before we start, a little explanation. Some of you may have wondered why we're singing the African American national anthem for a number of Sundays. To be truly in solidarity with our African American siblings, we should know and be able to sing their song well and be able to join in at gatherings where it's sung with gusto. And as UUCB member Cordell Sloan reminded this congregation a couple of years ago, quote, "Don't you dare to sing this song of my people half-voiced, as if you're not singing it for your lives." So let's now, with gusto, join in singing, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of humanity, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shall we need thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Please join me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
Hold out your light, you heaven-bound soldier, hold out your light. You heaven-bound soldier, hold out your light. You heaven-bound soldier, let your light shine around the world. Hold out your light, you heaven-bound soldier, hold out your light. You heaven-bound soldier, hold out your light. You heaven-bound soldier, let your light shine around the world. Singing, oh, preacher, can't you hold out your light? Oh, deacon, can't you hold out your light? Oh, leader, can't you hold out your light? Let your light shine around the world. Oh, preacher, can't you hold out your light? Oh, deacon, can't you hold out your light? Oh, leader, can't you hold out your light? Let your light shine around the world. Hold out your light, you heaven-bound soldier, hold out your light. You heaven-bound soldier, hold out your light. You heaven-bound soldier, let your light shine around the world.
Take sackcloth of the darkest dye, and shroud the pupils round. Servants of him that cannot lie, sit mourning on the ground. Let sorrow breathe in every tone, and grief in every strain ye raise. Insult not heaven's majestic throne with the mockery of praise. A man's whose light be the guide of age and youth brings to the shrine of slavery the sacrifice of truth. For the fiercest wrong that ever rose since Sodom's fearful cry, the word of life has been unclosed to give your God the lie. Oh, when ye pray for heathens' lands and plead for dark, blighted shores, remember slavery's cruel hands make heathens at your doors. These words of reckoning come from Black writer and activist Frances Watkins Harper's from her poem, The Biblical Defense of Slavery, which she wrote at the age of 20 in 1846. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Time for All Ages. I'm the Reverend Catherine Boyle. My pronouns are she, hers, hers. And I invite all my friends who are young or young at heart to get close and get ready for some great Black history. During this month, we will be uplifting Black UU history ancestors. We're going to begin with Frances Watkins Harper. I share her story from the UU white supremacy teach-in. Life was certainly not easy for young Frances Watkins. She had been born into a free Black family, but lived in Maryland where slavery was legal. When she was young, both of her parents died, and she went to live with her aunt and uncle. Theirs was an abolitionist household, meaning they worked to end slavery, and they also ran a school where Black children, including Frances, received a fine education. While still a young teen, she went to work as a housekeeper in the household of a Baltimore bookstore owner. Her employers encouraged her to use their big library. There, she devoured books and began to write poetry and essays. Her writings were published in her first book, Forest Leaves, by the time she was 20 years old. In 1850, Congress passed a law that allowed slave catchers to kidnap, enslave, and sell free Black people in states where slavery was legal. Frances fled to Pennsylvania, which did not allow slavery, where she became involved with the Underground Railroad, the movement to help people escape slavery. Through all of this, Frances continued to write and publish books of poetry, much of it against slavery. In time, she became the first Black woman to earn a living through the use of her words, living modestly and donating much of her income to helping her uncle's work with the Underground Railroad. In 1854, the Maine Anti-Slavery Society hired her to travel all over the Northeast to make anti-slavery speeches. She became one of the most famous speakers and authors of her time. All kinds of people came to hear her speak, but she made a point of not charging Black people admission. In 1860, the year the Civil War began, Frances Watkins married Fenton Harper, who already had 3 children. The two had a daughter together, and Frances took some time off of her writing and speaking to tend to her new family. A few short years later, her husband died, and Frances made the difficult decision to send her children to live with relatives and to go back out on speaking tours to make money. By then, slavery had ended, and she spoke for women's rights and for legal and civil rights for Black people. She wrote poems and essays about the experience of newly freed slaves, struggling to make their way despite the damage done to Black people by slavery. In 1870, she joined the Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. There, she found a community where white and Black people came together and where many shared her passion for justice. In many ways, Frances Harper was at home in the two worlds. Although she was used to working with people, with white people, she kept her connection to the Black community in Philadelphia. She maintained her membership in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, where she taught Sunday school. She also wrote 3 novels specifically for Black people, highlighting family connections and choices about racial identity. She pushed for education and voting rights for Black people, and she encouraged Black children to learn and grow, just as she had been encouraged as a child. During her long life, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper offered her voice, her words, her money, her labor, and her love to the work of justice making for her people. She used her voice and privilege as an educated free Black woman to raise awareness of the plights of Blacks in the United States after the Civil War. We honor her memory and place among our UU ancestors. There will be no online RE today due to the congregational meeting. However, an RE lesson in video form has been emailed out to you guys so you can watch it at your leisure.
We enter the time in our service that we make for our hearts and our spirits, for our cares and concerns, for one another and for ourselves. We lift up and hold the joys and sorrows, the cares, concerns, the challenges, even the heartbreaks that we may each be facing. During our community time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any of these in the comments. I invite us all to hold these cares in the loving and compassionate embrace of this community. Please join with me now in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life and love, God of many names, we gather in awareness of the opportunity before us as Unitarian Universalists. We have been given many chances before today to heal the wounds of racism and oppression that have beset our denomination for years and held us back from realizing the inherent worth and dignity of all Unitarian Universalists. We have made some progress, but we still have a long ways to go. We have an opportunity today to renew our commitment to this work and embrace it fully and thankfully. We know, though, that we have much work to do, that everyone has a role to play if we are to live fully into our principles and achieve our highest aspirations. We pray for the healing of the wounds of the past and present. We pray for open hearts and minds that we may envision what is possible. We pray for the courage not only to speak up, but also to listen, even when the words are hard to hear. We pray for compassion and understanding. We pray for resilience and determination, and for the fearlessness to take risks, to make mistakes, and to keep trying. In gratitude for the opportunities we have been given and the promise of what we can achieve together, and in the name of all that is holy, we say, Amen. And now let us join together in singing, There is a Balm in Gilead.
There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain. But
As today we work on grappling with the effects and reality of anti-racism within our own tradition, I thought it would be useful for us to go back to a few snapshots of the Black history within Unitarian Universalism. So this is by no means a complete history. That would take hours upon hours, but a couple of snapshots just to give you some context. So first, let us go back to the time of slavery and abolitionism. Now, Unitarian Universalism stories in our history, we have a lot of myths. And one of our favorite myths is talking about Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, who reportedly wrote his sermons with a pistol sitting at his side to protect the runaway slaves that he was harboring. Now, of the myths, many of our myths are not true, but this one happens to be true, that Theodore Parker indeed protected runaway slaves and did write his sermons with a pistol at his desk. However, it is both interesting that that is the entirety of this history we tell. We don't tell the fact that he was one of the prime secret supporters of the very radical John Brown, because that's not quite as acceptable to talk about. And also talking about this particular myth, the danger of this kind of hero worship is the assumption that this is actually where our edge is. And if that were the case, I would be talking to you in front of a pristine brick wall. Instead, I chose a crumbling wall to visually represent what we're talking about today, a crumbling wall the color of rust, because so much this is not the edge of where we are, nor has it been the edge of where we are. Instead, we were deeply divided even during the time of slavery. And so this goes back to well before 1961 when the Unitarians and Universalists came together. And both the Unitarians and separately from them, the Universalists all had issues that kept them from coming together and having any sort of a collective response. One was the lack of strong association, definitely amongst the Universalists, who really were still both Congregationalists and regionally based, but also a lack of strong philosophical and theological association for Unitarians. And there was also the fact that the social and moral order tend to get a little bit confused. That especially amongst the Unitarians, there was a lot of emphasis on rational thought. But the problem was also that the congregations and a lot of the wealthier folks in them were of the merchant class, whose economics and livelihoods and the way that they saw things and the way things work depended on the economic advantage of slavery. And the problem that the abolitionists tended to be, John Brown style, sort of the wrong sort of people. So all of these things get in the way. And essentially, here's the quote actually that someone said during that time that really sums it up, that the bells of the Unitarian Church are clogged by cotton. Very much the case that we have the Theodore Parkers, but that was in Boston, and literally in the same city, you have other Unitarians, members of prominent churches, who were hunting down runaway slaves to return them to slavery. That is almost the epitome of that time for us, that there were people doing some amazing forward-thinking things, and there were some people who were doing things that supported other positions and other realities. So that's kind of the divided time that we were then. And then this brings us, so let's fast forward a good bit of time into the late 1960s. And it is true that Unitarians, and then Unitarian Universalists, this was after consolidation, felt very, very proud of the many things that had happened during the civil rights movement. But again, this is dangerous thinking, because this sort of pride can make us think, oh, we're doing all the right stuff, aren't we great, without seeing the crumbling wall. And so I'll walk you through a few parts of this history, because this history of the 1960s, late 1960s, is actually crucial as you're trying to understand the current events for what's going on and has been going on in the past few years in Unitarian Universalism. So first of all, you had in 1967 the formation of the Black Unitarians for Radical Reform and the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus. And this brings us, and then that group came up with, that was Burr, B-U-R-R, and then Sober, don't get me going on our acronyms, were white groups which were supporters of Burr. Sober. Okay, let's just not even go there. And then February of 1968, the Black Affairs Council was established by some of the leaders in the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus. So the Black Affairs Council. And from here, things start to get a lot more interesting. I'm actually working from paper notes today. It's fabulous. Okay, so June 1968. So this is our General Assembly. Well, first of all, there was a request for funding from the Black Affairs Council. And the problem gets back to the finances, the UUA's unrestricted endowment funds have been spent. And because the books were being examined at that time, there wasn't money for them. But the Black Affairs Council did meet for the first time and began meeting and recommended funding. So here comes the Boston General Assembly, 1969. This is the Great Walkout, is what it was really known as, because there also was a counter group to the Black Affairs Council that had been formed, Black and White Action, BAWA, and they accused the Black Affairs Council of being undemocratic and separatist, and they wanted support. They wanted to be able to decide the funding themselves. So controversy over this, because there was a commitment to fund the Black Affairs Council, but then Black and White Action asked for funding too and opposed the funding. And all this controversy ended up with a microphone possession on the floor of General Assembly by members of the Black Affairs Council, those who supported the full funding, and the liberal religious youth. And ultimately, there was a walkout by delegates with the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus, and who were threatening to not return to General Assembly. Finally, Jack Mendelson, the Black Affairs Council Vice Chair, minister of Arlington Street Church, just down the road, managed to convince folks to gather in his church to be able to come together and have community. Ultimately, they came back to the service, and a vote was taken to fund the Black Affairs Council, not Black and White Action. But then the financial problems began to mount, and the UUA board had to say, wait, we can't fund you at the degree that we thought we could fund you. We don't have the money. Then the next General Assembly came, and the Black Affairs Council asked for their funding, a motion to restore the full funding, and it was defeated on the floor of General Assembly. And ultimately, the money wasn't had. There were lawsuits that flew around, and ultimately the funding never came through fully. Some of it did, which funded some great projects, but a lot of it didn't. And this brings us much closer to the present day, when a couple of different things were happening simultaneously. One is that the institutional racism within our denomination was never discussed. We thought we were in front of a pristine brick wall, but this is really what we were in front of. And then a number of years ago, there was a search for the regional lead for the Southern region. This is essentially the event that broke everything open in our present moment. And they reviewed a wide swath of candidates and ended up choosing a white male minister. A minority identified finalist or minority identified candidate spoke up and said, why are we still selecting white males for these lead positions? And essentially the whole thing broke open, because it exposed so many dynamics that had been present for so long, and a whole lot of reactionism and a whole lot of accusations, that as things snowballed, the UUA president, Peter Morales, well-meaning, but said some dumb things publicly. And then the executive director of the UU Ministers Association, well-meaning, said some dumb things publicly. And they both ended up resigning from their positions. Other folks resigned or all these sorts of things. And as things were crumbling at the national level, as we were coming up on a General Assembly, some folks stopped and said, wait a second, this is something we need to deal with, and formed the Commission on Institutional Change. We had three, because the president had just resigned, we were coming up on a presidential election, 3 people were appointed to the role of president for that year to help stabilize things and get the work of this commission going. This commission, the Commission on Institutional Change, did some amazing work for a few years, really tried to dig into both what's been happening as well as what are the larger things, the larger racially motivated things, other identity motivated things, oppressive things, not only at our denominational level, but at congregations across our country, and brought everything together into a report, Widening the Circle of Concern. This is the report that you've heard mentioned quite a bit at UUCB, as we've really begun to work with this report and to work with the recommendations and figure out what's right for UUCB. I've been part of a group that has been working with this report since August, and you're about to hear from a couple of members of that group to talk about their experience through those conversations. So to kick that off, though, our worship associate, Andrea Brown, is going to read you a couple of passages from the report, and then we're hearing from a couple members of the task force. It is all interesting, heartbreaking history that we have as we stand in front of walls that look like this. But the hope is that we can look at them clearly and move forward from here with different perspectives, more aware perspectives, knowing where we're going and what we need to do. So I invite you to continue joining with us in this work. Now with a little bit of historical background. Sorry I went quick, there's still so much more. And let's hear what some others have to say. Thank you.
Our first reading is attributed to James Cone from God of the Oppressed. Indeed, our survival and liberation depend upon our recognition of the truth when it is spoken and lived by the people. If we cannot recognize the truth, then it cannot liberate us from untruth. To know the truth is to appropriate it, for it is not mainly reflection and theory. Truth is divine action, entering into our lives and creating the human action of liberation. Our second reading comes from focus group participants from the Widening the Circle Commission study. We've gone from focusing on diversity, just trying to get diverse people into the congregation, which is into congregation, to inclusion, which is to find ways to, welcome and include diverse people in our congregation, to a greater understanding that it is not enough to welcome people into our playgrounds, our congregation. We need to focus on racial equity and really, really seek out the voices of those who have not been present in our congregation. People from marginalized groups, especially in terms of race, and really begin to co-create with people from marginalized groups to create a new culture.
Hello, my name is Suzette, and I am sharing my reflection as a participant of the Widening the Circle of Concern Committee. So what has been my experience? In a nutshell, I can say it's been very different than what I imagined, and so very difficult to describe, but I'm going to try. The WCOC is kind of like a cross between an incredibly dense graduate level course with lots of instances of, I'm not exactly sure what that sentence means, but I'm going to read it 2 times, maybe 3 more times, let it settle, and then come back to it. To the opposite spectrum of the warmth and emotional concern and care of a chalice circle of ordinary looking, bookish people, I might say, who at the strike of 7 p.m. on Tuesdays become a mighty team of spiritual avatars who are down to take up the torch for the cause. And what is the cause, one might ask? Well, I'm going to purposely leave the term cause amorphous. Euphemistically, if someone is down, they are with you. They may not know what is coming next, but they are ready to face it with you through the thick and the thin. Growing up as a person of color, a Black first-generation Afro-Caribbean Latinx female, the cause seemed to be only the concern of us nons. We who find ourselves at the bottom of the rung, far from the center, hanging out at the margins, not occasionally, but perpetually. It seemed that social ills like bias, institutional privilege, casual violence, and the very idea that the underpinnings of our country is a regime of racism has been regarded as rubbish, as imagined psychological maladies of POCs. Being part of a group tasked with coming up with recommendations for how UUCB as a church might challenge ourselves to become a more inclusive, welcoming committee has been an unexpected gift of validation. The recognition is not only at the level of, yes, your experience of drive-by racism are not only in your head, they are real, they are hurtful, they are hateful, and they are cumulative. What has been truly moving, or what feels new, is a sense of urgency, a commitment to repair and to change by educating ourselves, questioning norms, interrogating assumptions, and looking at our practices with a critical eye. The committee's charge to read a 130-page report by the UUA Commission on Institutional Change and come up with recommendations started out as a short-term task with a clear deliverable, but has morphed over the course of 5 to 6 months into something much more dynamic. I'm not sure how it happened or when it happened, but I think it began with the very small decision to slow down. As you know, slowing down is NOT, not in the UU DNA. We get things done. And to get things done, we have to move like the world is going to end this very minute. So the shift from this dominant cultural norm of preferencing efficiency over sustainability, or the tangible end product, like the group's list of recommendations to the board, over allocating time for in-group discussion and socio-emotional processing has had a huge impact. In a very short period, our group has been able to do things that we had not initially envisioned ourselves doing. Creating a future world that is equitable, safe, and inclusive for every person requires the commitment of all of us. It's easy to become overwhelmed by the enormity of this vision because it is big and it is overwhelming. But what makes it bearable, at least for me, is knowing that there is a group of people, some who look like me and some don't, who are down for the cause. Thank you.
When our church first put up our Black Lives Matter banner in the atrium, I was one of those people who said to myself, "All lives matter, don't they?" In my white-centered thinking, I was semi-consciously, willfully missing the point. The greater part of this past year has been a crash course for me in systemic racism. Since the murder of George Floyd, my circle of concern has widened. My initial approach to reading the 160-page report on UUA systemic racism was to read the avatar sections first. True and real experiences of racism within the UUA and our congregations. Details and names changed. I did it this way because I wanted to know what we were dealing with. I had a hard time believing that UUs are infected by the disease of racism. Most of the avatars are people of color, but there is a white counter-narrative avatar. He's a fourth-generation Unitarian, active in social justice in his church and community for decades. He believes the Commission is exacerbating divisions and that people will leave and the association will collapse financially. I can relate to fear of change, fear that I'm going to lose something, fear that A, now I'm not going to fit in, and B, I'm going to have to constantly monitor my words and actions, and oh, I don't want to, it's too hard. Can't things just go back to the way they were before, when I didn't have to think about these things? Many people in our congregation do not have the option to not think about these things. I remember decades ago having a conversation with my father, a member of this church, about why there weren't more black people in the congregation. We mentioned the sermons, the music, and that people are attracted to churches where they are comfortable with what they know and like. We concluded it was okay to be a mostly white church, just like it's okay that there are black churches. But what the Commission report is saying is that actually what happens is people of color are attracted to UU spaces for powerful reasons, but are turned off by the actual experience in the churches because of the microaggressions they experience. Words heard in UU spaces. Where are you really from? You must be new to Unitarian Universalism. You speak English so well. Welcome. Do you want to join the racial justice team? Oh, I just have to touch your child's hair. Personally, the sections on cultural appropriation were most challenging for me. I experienced a sinking feeling when I read the religious professional of color avatar's words. You sing songs without understanding the history, the pain, and the faith that birthed them. You change the words without understanding how that distinctly changes the meaning of our songs. When I read this, I thought, does that mean I don't get to sing black spirituals with the choir anymore? From our task force readings and discussions, I learned that as long as we make a commitment to acknowledge sources, educate ourselves, and adopt guidelines for using music in a culturally competent manner, we are not misappropriating. As one contributor to the report said, we must lift up sources of music where we might have stolen some things. Our church can be even more wonderful than it already is. We can be a safe haven where people don't have to brace themselves for the next microaggression. A loving, multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational community, glowing with a rainbow of cultures, ideas, music, and art. But we all must fearlessly look within and work together to heal from what we find. I will end with challenging words from Cornel West at the Ware Lecture at General Assembly in 2015. He said, "Who is willing to tell the truth, good and bad, up and down, insights as well as blindnesses of ourselves first, then our communities, then our nation, then our world?" I've got a lot of vanilla brothers and sisters that walk with me and say, Brother West, you know, I'm not a racist any longer. Grandma's got work to do, but I've transcended that." And I say to them, I'm a Jesus-loving, free, black man, and I've tried to be so for 55 years, and I'm 62 now. And when I look in the depths of my soul, I see white supremacy, because I grew up in America. And if there's white supremacy in me, my hunch is you've got some work to do too. If Cornel West can admit to white supremacy, I guess I can too. Please join me. We all lose out when it comes to racism, and we can't just say, oh, the social justice people will deal with it. Let's keep the healing conversations going, not just in our social justice groups, but in every committee meeting, coffee hour, choir rehearsal, classroom, and casual corner of our church.
Widening the circle of concern. This circle, whatever its circumference, must have in its center an understanding of the primary strategy employed by the world powers. The title of this history lesson would be Conquering, the precursor to colonialism or imperialism, which is the policy or ethos of using power and violence to control another nation or people. The history of colonialism is one of brutal subjugation of indigenous peoples. When our societies began to build and sustain themselves on this strategy, we were set on course to come to a global correction. And the sixth of our 7 UUA principles captures a key goal of a correction. That would be world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. The word evolution comes to mind, demanding all our imagination, vision, resolve, courage, genius, effort, industry, and money. No place for tenderness. I want to approach the history of colonialism without the aloof academic staging that hides the most important factor, the emotional truth. How do you feel about what happened? Break this silence, the unheard cries from our mortality. Let's stop avoiding the emotional processing. I want to know what you think and feel about this. Where and how is your power expressed? What do you believe in? Maintaining a comfortable distance from attending to the atrocities effectively consents to the destroying of human life. So if we don't confirm and validate peace, liberty, and justice for all, then it's counterfeit. The truth then being that we plow ahead with the old tactics, using as much violence as necessary with one hand, not letting the other hand know when it strikes a blow, extinguishing a life and its dreams. Without the telling of truth, we contrive whatever stories are necessary to justify the horrors imposed in the dehumanization of our brothers and sisters. We must start with re-education. Seeing the whole picture. Truth precedes reconciliation. I can't say what the correct pace is or how long it should take to achieve our mission. I believe, though, that we must be systematic, comprehensive, and thorough in making sure our collective understanding embraces and considers how the society operated and still operates. I would refer you to the movie 13, the book Caste, and the book Learning to be White as sources to restore some of the lost truth. Many in our church community have grappled with these the past year as we finally begin to take in some portion of what each of us must face. It's in the not knowing that we tacitly consent to let the machinery of our society crush forward with its inhumane designs. I trust that if we understand what we're doing, most of us will reach out to stay the brutal assault and shout out our condemnation of it. If you think things aren't that bad, consider just a couple of facts. I recently queried and found that on average, 20 police shootings of African Americans occur per week. The household poverty rate is so high that 46% of African American children live below the poverty line. What are the consequences of that? And I'm talking about today. This is not historical. This is not in the past. If we just look at the history of African Americans and put a number on the cost of slavery, authoritative estimates for the economic losses from slavery run as high as $50 trillion. So this accrual began long ago and continues full force. What does that do for your circle of concern? So the missing chapters must be studied. We have to replace norms and beliefs that do not let us introduce a whole new way of thinking and feeling consistent with our mission. There is, however, a social bill overdue by generations. America's leaders are dodging the enormity of this debacle of history. Emotional leverage is one thing, but what do we do with it? How do we change the direction of our journey? What I'm going to imagine in my better world, at the very least, will be understanding, an understanding that would enable discussion and collaboration and some amount of agreement on what we ought to do with our striving for justice and peace. We are already beginning to expand and elaborate the process of learning to change, but we need to develop more know-how so that our progress is not haphazard, but advances and in an emotionally responsible and safe way. Then the challenges of the necessary campaign of change, the extensive learning can be endured. The personal sacrifices made, dare I say, gladly. But disruption will be the norm for a time as we break things in an intelligent way. We must formulate strategy and programs with deliberation. No hysteria is needed here. In our church programs and in our worship, I'm imagining us adapting our music and our message to facilitate acceptance and reinforce the emotional skills needed to maintain equanimity and positivity during this wide-scale reorientation. I wonder if we are ready for change, for the work. What do we need as we forge this era of cultural reprogramming? We can manage the change and the pain of it. We will do it as our spiritual practice.
Care, compassion, community. These words, especially in pandemic time, capture for me the important values I have experienced in my 30 years with UUCB. Through colon cancer and cervical surgeries, I have felt the care and compassion of our spiritual community. I still keep supercards and well wishes you shared with me. During my work life at Cal, and now in my next life chapter, the minister's sermons and Sunday services have been a respectful sanctuary for seekers, a place of calm and renewal. Weekly demands are paused, spaces opened for a more loving and joyful way, and gentle challenges are offered to move into that space. When I committed to membership, it meant sharing time, talent, and treasure to honor that commitment. After service on the board, 2 terms as president, and leadership on capital and stewardship campaigns, I now have the privilege this year to co-chair with Michael Armstrong the stewardship campaign. Barbara and I are among the fortunate who have done well this year, and we will be increasing our pledge by 20%. I know others have had a challenging year and will not be able to give all they'd like. We invite you to give what you can, reflecting your value for UUCB. When we all do our best, we are one under the canopy of the Mosaic Tree of Life. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, for those inspiring words. They were genuine and personal. and they resonate with me personally and why I give to UUCB. You see, there are so many things I want to accomplish in this one wild and crazy life. I love that yearly service. But I can't do it all. I can't physically touch all the causes that need to be addressed. What I can do is associate myself with an organization like UUCB that does such good work. Everything from chalice circles to pastoral care, personal theology, to organizing food drives, Earth Day cleanups, witnessing for human rights, and our community partnerships with organizations like GRIP. So I give to support the good work that this amazing church does. It's why I'm asking you to give whatever you can, so that, as Patrick mentioned, the branches of our tree of life can continue to spread and grow.
As always, UUCB continues to need your gifts and support as we commit to making ours a vibrant, loving community that inspires spiritual growth, justice, and lives of integrity and service. We hope you will continue to practice generosity this year, especially with our Good Neighbor organizations. This month, we are sharing half of our offerings with Collaborizing to support the good work they do in our wider community. Collaborizing's mission is to explore humanity through social and cultural exchange. Their primary focus is on race equity work, but they also have a community gardening project in the Richmond Greenway. Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. More details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as our offertory begins. Thank you.
Over my head there is music in the air. Over my head there is music in the air. Over my head there is music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head there is singing in the air. Over my head there is singing in the air. Over my head there is singing in the air. There must be a God somewhere.
Please join me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service. It's been so good to be together in praise and song today. I'd like to encourage you to stay informed about and involved in all that's going on in our congregation by exploring our website, uucb.org. Among other things, you can find a link in News to the week ahead, our weekly email newsletter, which contains information about upcoming activities. As we prepare to leave the worship service, here are a few important announcements. First, right after the service, we'd love to have you head over to our Zoom congregational meeting. You can find the Zoom link in the week ahead email. Next, the worship associates are looking for a few new members. It's a wonderful way to participate in leading Sunday services. If you think you might be interested in joining us, please check out the announcement in the week ahead. We'd love to talk to you about it further. Finally, on February 21st at 9:30 in the morning, our very own Helen Tinsley Jones and Julia Rogers will be giving a personal theology talk titled Beloved Community in Action and as Spiritual Practice. You can find all the personal theology talks under the Learning tab of our website. Now, please join in singing our closing song, One More Step. The words will be on the screen.
Peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard. Why, everyone will say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared. Why, everyone will say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung. Why, everyone will sing one more song.
Go now in hope, for the arc of the universe is long, and we can bend it towards justice. Go in courage, for together we have the strength to confront injustice in our daily lives, around us and in the larger world. And go in love, because a holy and generous love is both the reason and the means by which we transform our lives. And as you go, remember, in all of these things, remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.